I thought it was about time we did a video about coffee roasting. So in this video, we're going to talk about the colour changes that occur when we roast coffee. Before we dive into the colour change, I thought I'd give you a quick introduction to the coffee roaster that we use to roast our coffee. It's a 25 kilogram Probat coffee roaster, made in Germany. This one's about 18 months old now. And you'll see at the very top, it's got a hopper. And in there, we place up to 25 kilograms of green or unroasted coffee. And then below it, there is a drum. And this drum rotates, and there are fins inside. And as it rotates, the coffee beans are thrown up, are lifted up away from the edge of the drum where all the heat is, into the airflow. And it's this that roasts the coffee. The drum has got a burner underneath, so we'll heat the drum to our charge temperature, much like you will preheat an oven. And then when we're ready, we will release all the beans through a little sliding trapdoor at the top into the drum. And the process of coffee roasting is really about managing and manipulating heat energy right the way throughout the roast to get the desired effect. At the end of the roast, there's a door on the front that can open, and all the beans will drop into a cooling tray. And here we can move them around, but we can also drive cold air through them to cool them as quickly as possible and stop that roasting. And eventually, there's a second little trapdoor in the cooling tray that drops the beans into a container ready for packing. So I've picked one of our coffees, I've picked one of the components for an espresso blend, and we're going to look at the colour change that happens throughout the roast. And the coffee begins life as a green coffee bean, although as you can see, it's kind of a blue-green hue to it. And these are the seeds of a coffee cherry. Now, everything we know about that cherry, where it came from, its moisture contents, its density, its how it was processed, we all need this information to understand how best to roast that coffee. If you look carefully, you should be able to see some kind of silver skin around the outside of each of those beans. And throughout the roast, the coffee is going to start to expand and it's going to shed that silver skin. And we collect that in a separate container. It's called chaff. And from our point of view, we send it off to a local garden who use it to help compost their vegetables and the plants that they grow. So we'll start the roast off, and for the first few minutes, very little will happen. This next sample I've pulled off is at 3 minutes, and the beans are still green, although a slightly different green tone. They're a bit brighter and more olive in colour. So for the first few minutes, we're having to get rid of a lot of the moisture content in the bean. We won't get rid of it all, but most of it will go right at the start. And it's the same as if you're trying to brown something at home. Until you shed the moisture and got the moisture out of that product, it won't brown. So we will work through here. We're going to be really careful. We're trying to apply enough heat and enough energy at the start to begin to penetrate that bean without going so quick that we don't get a nice, consistent drying phase. The first real colour change we're going to see is what we call early yellow. And here the beans have lost all that green and they're about to start the process of browning. Now it's a really important phase because the key reaction we're going to see now is what we call the Maillard reaction. And it's a complex chemical reaction that we associate with roasting and baking and grilling and frying. Whether we're cooking meats or baking bread and cakes, whether we're grilling or roasting, you're going to see that browning of a product, and it adds sweetness and adds complexity, and that's really important in our coffee roasting. This next sample has been taken at 7 minutes in, and you can see a nice tan colour to the coffee. And this is the part of the roast around about here where caramelization starts to happen. And caramelization is going to be the breaking down of sugars into, again, more complex flavours, but it's going to slowly start to impart some bitterness into the coffee as well. So we're 8.5 minutes in here, nearly 3/4 of the way through the roast, and it's the first time the coffees generally start to look brown. If you look very closely, they haven't expanded that much. There's been a little bit of expansion, but that silver skin in the main is still there, and the coffees have got a very mottled look to their surface. They haven't expanded and smoothed out. Now, inside these beans, the chemical reactions taking place are creating carbon dioxide gases and water vapour, and it's trapped inside the bean. It can't get out. The bean itself is too dense. However, we're about to enter a phase where that build-up of gas pressure inside the bean is about to be released. We're just shy of 9 minutes and first crack is about to start. This is all those gases that were previously held inside actually forcing their way out of the bean, and you hear a popping sound, a continuous popping sound sometimes from inside the coffee roaster. It starts off quite quiet and slow, and it gets ever faster as we go through this next period. It's quite an important period because at this point we need to make sure we've got that roast under control. Any failure to this point in time means the roast can either run away with itself or it can stall. So the coffee roaster's got to be very careful about everything they're doing to make sure they manage the roast through this next phase. We're halfway through first crack now, about 9.5 minutes in, and the beans have definitely expanded. They're browner in colour, and most of that silver skin has been shed. I've done a little recording of first crack so you can appreciate the kind of sound it has. So we'll play that for a moment so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. So this last sample was taken from the cooling tray itself. These beans have just come out of the roaster. They have had 11 minutes and 13 seconds in the roaster, and they have puffed out a lot more, and that seam has started to open. It hasn't opened fully. There's still a bit of that yellow chaff inside, but it's definitely opened out. And that's the kind of things we look for towards the end of the roast. We don't just go on kind of figures and feedback from the roaster itself. We're looking to see how do the beans look. Are we happy with how they look? And we can kind of combine that with information from inside the roaster before we drop the beans. These beans now drop into the cooling tray. We'll cool them as quickly as we can, and then we'll get them bagged up, ready for shipping out. So there we go, the colour changes that happen throughout the roast. If you've got any thoughts, comments or questions, please feel free to get in touch. Thanks for watching, and your likes and shares are really welcome.